right, well, I think we'll get started. We've got like 35 people here. I'm sure others will pop in, but I guess I'll just start by thanking everybody for joining us today. If I had a choice, I would rather be talking to you all in person rather than on a screen, but we had some logistical issues, which thought that this might be a better way to reach more people. So um, we are gonna give it a go here. I guess you're here to learn about shorebirds. We're going to learn about the Shorebird Stewardship Program. We will get into a little bit of that kind of after my part of the presentation, and I'll kind of start off just by talking a little bit about uh, shorebirds in general. Kind of talk a little bit about some of the focal species that we are focusing on here in Kiawah. And then I'll turn it over to Cindy, who will talk a little bit more about the actual stewardship program and a little bit more details. I will share my screen again. I took it off for those in the comments. I did take it off, so I will start it again here for everyone, and then we'll get going. I guess because we have a bunch of people here, it'll probably be easier if we just wait till the end for questions rather than doing it in the middle. So hold your questions till the end. You can write them in the chat potentially, and if we can go through, maybe answer them that way as well. But we'll try to get to everything at the end. Okay. All right. I assume you can all see this now. So I'll get started here. For those that don't know me, I'm Aaron Given. I'm one of the wildlife biologists here at the town of Kiawah. We've been running the Shorebird Stewardship Program on this island for many years now. It's been growing every year since we started it. I feel like the birds on the island and shorebirds on the island are really a beneficiary of this program. Because we're educating a lot of people, and in the process, the birds have a little bit less pressure on them with different people either walking around through the birds or dogs or whatnot. So, all right. So as many of you may have seen back in 2019. There was this study that got published. It made national headlines. The big headline was 2.9 billion birds gone since 1970. So this study basically looked at lots of different survey data to determine that we've lost a lot of birds in the last 50 or so years. And part of those groups were shorebirds. And this group, this study concluded that about 37% of all shorebird species have declined since shorebird species numbers have declined by 37% since 1974 across many, many different species. So I pulled some numbers to try to get some specific numbers of different species just by looking at the literature and trying, there's lots of different studies out there, and if you start to look in the literature, you're going to find lots of different numbers. But I found a number that said 68% of all shorebird species are declining. There's some other studies that say that it's even a lot more than that, which I'll show you here after this slide. Ruddy turnstone, that's a species that we have on Kiawah. One study showed that species has declined 80% since 1974. We found that the semi-palmated sandpiper populations are also decreasing at a pretty steady rate. And as we know, red knox numbers, those are some of our more famous birds that we get here, and mainly in the spring. Those numbers have really declined. The study I saw was 70 to 80%, but there's also numbers out there that are much higher than that, up to almost 95% decreases in that species. There is some good news. Not all species are decreasing. There are some that are increasing. And one example I found was the American oyster catcher, which over the last 19 years has increased by about 23%. So this is a more recent study that I ran across. This was published in 2023, so it's fairly new. This study was looking at shorebird numbers during fall migration. And this was across much of North America, but a lot of it was skewed towards the East Coast because that's where a lot of the surveys were taking place. And so this is essentially one of the findings that they had. So every dot below the black line indicates a species that was showing negative population changes. So their populations are decreasing. And there's only 2 species that they found that actually have a somewhat increasing to stable populations. Now, if you look all the way to the left side of the screen here, red dots, they were the species that was decreasing the most. So this is the study that showed had a 94% decrease since 1980. And I don't know if you know much about stats and stuff, but the lines that are going through the black dots, those are the confidence intervals. So the smaller the line is, the more confident that number, that these are more correct. So these ones down here towards the right have these big long air bars. That means that there's a lot more variation in the data, so they're not as confident that what was calculated is as correct. So even though these are showing positive, it's possible that they could be lower and also be decreasing as well. Just more information is needed. So this is the same data set, just looking at it a different way. So essentially, this is the annual percent change in abundance for those 28 species that we looked at before for the most recent 3-generation period. And I'll kind of explain quickly what they mean by a 3-generation period. So a generation period, it was calculated for each of these species. So it's different for each one of these species. And it essentially takes into account the species lifespan, the age at which it breeds. So they can kind of get an idea a little bit more for each of these species. But in general, most of these species have a very similar generation period, and it kind of averages out to be about a little over 3 years. So when we're talking about a 3-generation period, that's about a 10-year period is what they're looking at. So just think about it as you know, each of these dots represents 10 years. So we're basically looking at this, and you can see they're comparing the last 10 years compared to the 10-year period before that. And as these dots, the black and the root green, if you look at either one species, the further apart they are, that means that the population has decreased at a greater rate than the ones that are closer together. So if we look at the red knot again, you know, these dots are pretty far apart, which means that between those 2 10-year periods, red knots have decreased in a much higher rate than if those numbers were together. But again, if you look at it, there's a negative trend for pretty much all of these species here. So the general theme is the same. And this is very similar, just a different, same data set, just showing you again that most of these species are decreasing across much of their ranges. All right, so we know, obviously, we know these birds their numbers are decreasing. So why do the birds need our protection? So what's causing these birds for their populations to decline? So number one is habitat loss. This can be naturally, you know, hurricanes, storms, erosional events, things like that can just change the habitat very quickly. Another reason could be human caused. So, you know, different development that occurs, you know, right up to the beach and on the beaches that can cause, you know, the beach to change and can eliminate parts of that habitat that may not be useful for birds anymore. And then obviously sea level rise and climate change. That's rapidly changing the way our beach looks. You know, we're having higher tides than we normally would. And we have higher tides. That's changing um, the front part of our beach. That's changing the elevations at the ends of the island. So areas that might have been higher and drier sand are now a little bit lower. And all that you know, it's changing where birds can nest, and it's also changing their food sources as well. So their habitat loss is probably one of the biggest ones. Another one is disturbance. So people, like the birds, like to use the beach, so do people. So you know, there's you know, conflicts between the birds and people. Where the people want to be, the birds also would like to be as well. So we just, you know, have to be a little bit more cognizant when we're on the beaches to try to not disturb those birds as much. And then, of course, there's dogs on the beach as well. They, you know, these birds will see these dogs more as a threat than people because they see a dog as more like a predator. So they may flee away from a dog much quicker than they might a person. And of course, then there's natural predators out on the beach too. So you've got things like crows who eat a lot of eggs that the shorebirds nest on that we have. We've got peregrine falcons that are also hunting. We've got bobcats and coyotes and lots of things out there that want to eat other birds and their eggs. So there's just lots of different things out there that want to get them. Loss of food. One example of this is the horseshoe crab harvesting that has been going on for many years. So basically to collect blood for research for different diseases and things to try to come up with to help with the biomedical field and things like that. So horseshoe crabs are caught in large numbers. They are bled out to where their blood is harvested, and then they're actually released back. But a lot of those crabs may not make it. Horseshoe crabs are also harvested a lot for fishing. They use parts of horseshoe crabs for commercial fishing, for bait and things like that. And a lot of birds rely on horseshoe crab eggs during the spring migration. So that's a big source of food for them is when the horseshoe crabs come up to spawn. There's millions and millions and millions of eggs, and the shorebirds will congregate in those areas to eat those eggs. And there's a lot less horseshoe crabs than there were. There's going to be a lot less food for them as well. And then this isn't a big deal in our area, but in other parts of the world, they do hunt shorebirds for food and subsistence and things like that. So you know, another thing that these birds have to deal with. So of all these things, kind of what can we do? So the thing that we can actually do here is we can focus more on the disturbance aspect of it and kind of target that portion of you know, some of these things that are negatively impacting the population. So what we do, so we can protect key habitats. We can educate the public. And we obviously we have this Shorebird Stewardship Program. So these are the types of things that we're doing on this island to try to help shorebirds that use Kiawah. So I'll start off just by talking a little bit about the protected areas. Um, so we have designated critical habitat at both ends of the island. So as you can see here on the east end of the island, from the ocean course, pretty much all the way until the beach part ends down at the Stono River Inlet. That's all designated as critical habitat for shorebirds, for turtles, and other things as well. But this area basically has a designation where we don't allow dogs, and no dogs are allowed at all. At all, doesn't matter what time of year in these areas. Similarly, down at the west end of the Kiawah, about halfway between the tip and Beachwalker County Park is kind of where the critical habitat line starts, and it goes all the way down to the end of where Captain Sam's Inlet is. Again, this area is off limits to dogs. What other things that we'll do is we'll close down portions of the beach or parts of the beach during the nesting area season. So last year, there was, if you were out at the east end last year, kind of beyond the ocean course, you probably saw a bunch of these yellow signs up. Those were indicating our nesting area last year. And this is just to keep people out of those areas as well as dogs and other things. So that just kind of gives these areas where the birds are nesting some protection so that people aren't walking around in there. They're not being disturbed by dogs or anything else. So this was kind of the area that was signed off last year. If you've recently been out to the east end, you've noticed that that area has changed a lot since last year, and it's flattened out a good bit, and we've lost a lot of dunes. So this year, this area is probably going to be reduced by a pretty big portion because there's just not as much suitable nesting habitat as there was last year. So we'll just have to kind of see. Hopefully, we'll get some good sand buildup here in the next month or so or two before the birds really start nesting. But likely we'll see a much smaller area that will have to be closed off this year compared to last year. But one positive thing is down at the west end, Captain Sam's Inlet, we actually had our first Wilson's plover nest down there since the inlet got relocated back in 2015. So that area has actually been building and building up. So hopefully we'll have more birds that'll start nesting down there. So there's a chance that this year there'll be actually a nesting area closure down at the west end as well. We're just gonna have to see what that habitat looks like in the coming months. So. All right, so this is just kind of showing an overall view of our pet restraint, kind of our ordinance. So as I mentioned, we have the critical habitat areas in red. We don't allow dogs in those areas year round. We have the screen section, which is the main part of the beach, basically from this critical habitat on the west end all the way to the beach club. We call that our seasonal dog leash area. So from November 1st through March 15th, dogs can be off leash in this section of the beach. And then in the blue section here, we have this as a dog use area. And this is basically an area of the beach where dogs can be allowed off leash year round. Now we are revisiting this ordinance right now to see about making some changes to that. That'll be a little bit more bird friendly. Maybe changing some dates, shifting around a little bit of this stuff a little bit. So we're kind of we have a subcommittee right now that is looking at this. So hopefully we'll be able to to make some minor changes to this that'll make a little bit more impact for the birds. All right, I'm just going to jump in now to our focal species. And really, I'm just going to go through these 5 species that we have listed here and just kind of talk a little bit more in depth about each one of these. So these are the kind of the, there's lots of species of shorebirds on our beaches that we steward for, but these are kind of the focal ones, meaning that they either nest on the island, they're either endangered federally or threatened federally, so that they have a little higher priority, I guess you could say, for protecting. All right, so the first one is the least terned. This is the smallest tern species that we have in North America. They really are tiny if you haven't seen one. These guys usually arrive sometime around late March, early April or so. They are absent from our beaches during the wintertime, so they migrate south in the fall to spend most of their time in southern or the northern part of South America. And these guys are colony nesters, meaning that they nest right on the beach, and they do it with a lot of other of the same species. So there may be 50 to 150 nests all within this small area, and they're all on the ground, sort of next to each other. They all have their own personal territory too, so they're not too close, but they're close enough to each other to where they're at least a beak's length away from each other, so they're not squabbling too much. And these guys are the status, they are threatened for South Carolina. They are not listed on the Endangered Species Act federally, but they are listed as threatened in our state. One of the things that these birds have done or become accustomed to, because of the lack of nesting beaches for them, is they have been able to take advantage of rooftops that have the really fine pea gravel on top. This kind of mimics the preferred habitat that they like on beaches, and they will actually lay their eggs on different buildings in up and down the coast that have this very flat roof with this very specific small pea gravel type of substrate on top. And so back in 2020 and 2021, we had really good nesting success and good years of nesting on Kiawah with least terns. We estimated anywhere from about 150 nests each of those years. Unfortunately, the last couple of years, we've had a pretty good erosional events down at the east end, and that resulted in a lot of that higher beach that the least terns like converting into a lower beach that would get flooded more regularly, and just was not as suitable for them. And unfortunately, last year we did not have any successful breeding like least terns out at the east end. So hopefully that area will build back up at some point, and the birds will come back. So this is kind of what a least tern looks like. I mentioned it was pretty small. So this is a bird that might be about the size of like a robin. One of the unique characteristics with these guys is they have a yellow bill and yellow legs. So unlike a lot of our other tern species that you'll see on Kiawah, they'll either have orange bills or black bills. There won't be any other tern species that has a yellow bill like this that we would normally see. They also have this kind of black head crown thing with this kind of like racing stripe going through their eye, with this very distinct white kind of forehead. Again, not many of the other tern species will kind of show that bright white forehead like that. A lot of them will have black on the top of their head, but that black will go all the way down to the bill, and it looks like they'll have a solid cap on top. I did mention kind of when these birds come. Like I said, they're very common here in the spring and summer. That's when they're here during the nesting season. They usually trickle out of here around I don't know, September-ish, and then usually starting in October, there's very few of them around, and then we won't see them again until the following March or April. So this is the picture of a least tern with its chick right here next to it. As you can see, this is kind of typical habitat where they would lay a nest. And they would lay, like I said, they lay their eggs directly right on the sand here. The chicks are very mobile within about a few hours of hatching. And once they hatch and they're able to kind of move, those chicks will kind of move from where the nest site was to, someplace where they can hide a little bit. And then the adults will come and feed them regularly throughout the day. All right, the next species is the Wilson's plover. This is another bird that is here. It nests on our island. These guys are present year round though, which we have birds that are either appear to be resident species, meaning that they are here all year round. We have some birds that come here and spend the winter only, and then we have some birds that are here in the summertime and then migrate away for the winter. But these are a medium-sized plover species. They usually nest anywhere from starting in late March through July. Unlike the least terns, these guys are more solitary nesters, so you're not going to find these guys nesting all in a big group like you would the least terns. You will find a Wilson's plover nesting among the least terns, but you're not going to find a bunch of Wilson's plovers all nested together. They're a little bit more territorial between other individuals of their species, and they do defend those territories pretty rigorously. So, they're not going to allow another Wilson's plover to kind of get within their nesting territory. They do lay their eggs directly on the sand, just like least terns. Here's a nest of a Wilson's plover right here. One thing that Wilsons do a little different than least terns is a lot of times you're going to find their nests closer to vegetation or some sort of structure on the beach. So, it'll either be with some grass, maybe some wrack, or there's a piece of driftwood or something on the beach. They might try to put it right next to that piece of driftwood. Least terns will just plop their eggs right down in the open part of the sand. Also, this kind of like the least tern, the Wilson's plovers, they have a status of threatened in South Carolina, but they are not threatened or endangered federally. And we have anywhere from, I would estimate 6 to 12 nesting pairs of Wilson's plovers on our beaches every year. It's because they are a little bit more their nests are harder to find. It's a little bit more difficult to get a good number of them. But I've been working a little bit more harder the last couple of years, trying to get a better estimate of what we have of the Wilson's plovers out on our beaches. Okay. All right, so this is what Wilson's plovers look like. These are both males. We know that they're males because of this black band right here. The female will actually have kind of a brown band. It won't be black like this. This is, like, as I mentioned, the medium-sized plover. And if you don't know your shorebirds that well, you don't know what the difference between a plover and a sandpiper is. don't need to worry about that really for this presentation, but one of the things that one of the characteristics of a Wilson's plover compared to some of the other plovers that we might have on our beach is this bigger, thicker bill. So most plover species have a kind of a shorter, stubbier bill, unlike sandpipers that have kind of a longer bill. These guys are mainly picking things off the top of the sand rather than probing into the sand like the sandpipers. So their bill is much smaller. But of the plovers, the Wilson's plovers have the largest bill. And that's mainly because of their food preference. You know, they specialize on fiddler crabs, so they will actually use that bill to be able to grab that fiddler crab, and they'll grab it and they'll shake it until they can get that claw off. It allows them to kind of manipulate that crab a little bit better to eat it. Overall, they're kind of just brownish. You know, they got this brown back, they've got a white belly here, they've got some brown on their heads, and they have a black bill, and their legs are kind of flesh colored. So that's something else that's a little different compared to the other plovers that we have on the island. So, for example, we have piping plovers and semi-palmated plovers. Both of those have kind of an orange or yellow colored leg. And these guys have more of a kind of a tannish, purplish kind of flesh colored. I mentioned that these guys are here year round. You're more often going to see them during the summer months in spring and fall when they're most abundant. But we do have some birds here in the winter as well. They just aren't as plentiful in the winter. Because one, there's less of them, and two, they're not making a lot of noise and not making their presence known because it's not the breeding season. So these guys are very vocal during the breeding season when they're defending their territory. So if you can learn what they sound like, you'll be able to find Wilson's plovers as well. All right, so you can probably see in this picture these are two Wilson's plover chicks here. Again, they're probably only a day or two old, but they are highly mobile. With as soon as within a few hours of hatching out of that egg, they can get up and kind of move and run. So the Wilson's plover, the adults will take care of these chicks until they fledge. 3-4 weeks or so, even sometimes even longer. And they will kind of take them in and out of the different parts of the beach to areas where they'll actually show them where food is at, and kind of show them where places are that are safe to hide when predators come around and things like that. All right, the other species is the American oyster catcher. This is a very large, very distinctive looking bird that we have on our beaches. They are also here all year round, but they also nest on our beaches as well. Their nesting occurs during the same period that Wilson's plovers and terns are nesting, so that April to July period. These guys are also solitary nesters, so you're not going to see a bunch of oyster catchers all nesting together on the sand. You'll see, maybe a pair and then nesting in one spot, and then maybe a couple 100 yards down the beach, there might be another one. They lay their eggs directly onto the sand as well. And they mainly feed on bivalves. They have this specialized bill here, which allows them to basically get into the shell. They're able to kind of cut and snip that muscle that holds the clam shells closed, which allows them to then open that shell up and then they can eat what's inside. So we don't have a ton of oyster catchers that nest on our beaches, obviously because they are territorial and they do maintain a territory. So there's only just so much room for them on our beaches, but we estimate that in most years we have about 6 to 8 of these bird nesting pairs on our island. So these are some of the things to look at for when you're on the beach and you want to try to identify an American oyster catcher. So I did mention they're pretty distinctive. There's not many other birds that look like this on our beach. They've got this dark black head, this bright yellow eye with this red ring around it, kind of a brownish black back with white underneath, but they've got this bright orange, really long bill. The only other species that could potentially be confused for this on our beach would be a black skimmer, but they their behaviors are much different. And once you, if you don't know what a black skimmer looks like, once you see one, their differences are pretty apparent. I may have a picture of a skimmer later on in this presentation. But these guys are here, like I said, year round, and they're pretty common actually. So during the fall and the winter time, you'll see big flocks of these guys, sometimes more at the ends of the island, or you'll see them flying down the beach, kind of over the surf or even out a little further, going to, areas to roost or or some of their feeding areas. Back up in the Kiawah River is a great place for them to feed. There's lots of oyster bars back in there. So during low tide, if you're ever kayaking or on a boat tour, doing anything on the Kiawah River, you'll probably likely see a lot of American oyster catchers feeding during low tide back in here. So here's a picture of an American oyster catcher with this chick. This chick is within a few hours of hatching. They are, kind of moving around, trying to find safer places to hide. All right, so the fourth species I'm going to talk about is the red knot. So this bird is a migrant through Kiawah. So this bird does not nest at Kiawah. In fact, it goes all the way up to the Arctic to nest. This bird comes here in huge numbers during the springtime, where it stages prior to going to the Arctic. So, there could be anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 red knots all at one time on Kiawah between kind of mid-March through early May. And what these birds are doing here is they're essentially fattening up and resting here so that they can make the journey from here almost all the way to the Arctic. And they do that, which I'll talk about here in the next slide, I believe, in these big, long, nonstop flights. So these guys are federally threatened. So they have federal protections associated with them. And there was a recent study a couple years ago done actually here on Kiawah that estimates that about 17,000 red knots pass through Kiawah during the spring, which is about a little over 40% of the entire population of red knots. So Kiawah is a super important area for this species during its life cycle. Okay, so here's the map. So essentially what we've got the red dots are all known breeding areas. So they're nesting all throughout the Arctic here. And they, like I mentioned, their wintering areas are these blue lines here. So you've got, there are populations that winter along the Atlantic coast. We actually have about 200 or so red knots that spend the winter on Kiawah. So if you see red knots out there right now, those are probably our winter flock that is here. There's large numbers of wintering birds in Florida, and there's some along the Gulf Coast as well. You've also got birds that winter in the northern part of South America, and also way down here towards the tip of South America. What makes these birds pretty incredible is the migration that I kind of alluded to. So these birds will, um, you know, some of the birds that spend the winter all the way down here will make this migration to the Arctic. Um, and they'll do it over a period of time, but they make these really long nonstop flights from staging area to staging area. So, these birds will fly directly from the southern tip of South America, and they're going to go all the way across to the northern part here, where they might stage for a little while, feed, fatten up, and then their next stage is going to be they're going to leave from the northern part of South America, and they're going to fly over the open ocean, and they're going to make this flight nonstop to the east coast of the United States. So this is a several day journey for them, and they're doing it over open ocean, and it's they're not stopping. They're flapping continuously the entire time. So they obviously have to eat a whole lot before they do that and get a lot of fat on their body so that they have enough energy that they can use to make it this entire way. Once they get to the East Coast, there's several staging areas along the East Coast that they use. One is our area here, and the other is up here in Delaware Bay, and there's some others as well. And they may spend their time here for another 2 to 4, 5, 6 weeks or so, fattening up until they'll actually leave the East Coast, and they'll make another nonstop flight. Almost, they may go nonstop to the Arctic. Some birds may stop somewhere kind of up in the area of St. James Bay. But by the time they get up here, they can get to their breeding ground pretty much in one shot. So they have a pretty incredible migration. And then obviously after breeding season is over, they turn around and kind of do the same thing again. All right, so this is kind of what red knots look like. So this time of year, this is what the birds on the big part of the picture here is what they're going to look like. So they're going to look fairly similar to a lot of the other shorebirds that are on the beach. They're just going to be kind of gray on top, white underneath. They do have these kind of barred, kind of spotted flanks here on the side. And their bill is kind of a medium length. It's not super long. It's not super short. It's just kind of a very generalized, generic looking shorebird bill. But over time, they will start to molt into their breeding plumage while they're here. So, and then by kind of probably mid-April or so, you're going to start seeing birds that are going to start having some more red color coming in on their breast and on their head. Their back is going to have a little bit more black and coming in on it. And then by the time they leave us in early May, mid-May, they're going to look more like this bird here in the lower picture. And that's kind of their breeding plumage, which they will wear with them all the way to the Arctic and during the breeding season. All right, and then the last one I'm going to talk about is the piping plover. So this is a bird that is here during the winter time. It's here during migration as well, but it's a bird that overwinters on Kiawah.
It's Great Lakes.
Also another one of those federally threatened or endangered species. What makes them a little unique is they have 3 nesting populations. They have a Great Plains population, which is this area here. They have a Great Lakes population that nests kind of on the beaches around the Great Lakes here of Michigan, Illinois, and even Wisconsin. And then there's the Atlantic population here on the East Coast. They're fairly distinct populations, although the birds themselves look similar. So there's really no way to tell which ones are from which population. But they're all threatened. And the Great Lakes population is the smallest by far. And that one is listed as endangered. As I mentioned, these are the winter resident here. And we do have we have a general idea of about how many birds use Kiawah. Now on the east end of the island, we estimate there's anywhere from probably, that number 3 is probably low. We're starting to see more and a little bit more in the last couple of years. So I would guess that we probably have anywhere from 5 to 8 individuals that winter on the east end now. And then on the west end, it's probably very similar, 5 to 8, maybe even a few more. And mainly that's because we share those birds with Seabrook Island. So they bounce back and forth from Kiawah to Seabrook on the west end. So, you know, they may come over to Kiawah for a little while and feed, and then they may bounce over to the Seabrook and eat or rest or do whatever they need to do over there. So they're kind of moving back and forth across that inlet. One interesting thing about these piping plovers is during their peak migration period, which falls usually around mid-March, we will see a lot of piping plovers on our beach. So I've had one count that have been about more than 100 piping plovers just on one drive from one end of the island to the other during one of my surveys. During the migration, you'll notice that these piping plovers are seen more on the front part of the beach. But in the wintertime, they're more commonly is going to be seen at the ends of the island. All right, so this is what a piping plover looks like. If you remember back from the picture of the Wilson's plover that we had, remember how big the bill was compared to this. So this is a much shorter, stubbier bill. These guys are much lighter in color as well. So the back is kind of a light gray, and they have a white breast here. They have a pale breast band during the winter time, and it gets black during the summer, or even during migration. You know, get seabirds in March that'll look like this. They'll be in there during the summer like that. And as they transition to their breeding plumage, their bill will turn from black to orange. And their legs obviously are a yellow-orange color. They're a little bit lighter yellow-orange in the winter. And they'll actually get a little bit brighter when they're in their breeding. Again, a fairly common bird to see during migration time. And if you go out on the east end or the west end, pretty much on any day during the winter time, and you know what you're looking for, you will definitely find piping plovers out there. All right, so this is kind of a timeline, if you will, that I put together kind of to show you the frequency and the relative abundance compared to each other of all these focal species. So we've got the calendar here going across the top. So as I mentioned, you know, least terns are going to be here in the biggest numbers from April to July when they're nesting, and their numbers kind of trail off through the late summer, early fall period, and then we don't see them throughout the winter time. Wilson's plovers are here year round, smaller numbers outside of the breeding season, where there's a money more here during the summer months. Again, oyster catchers year round. We'll see a big number of them during the fall and a little bit more in the winter. And then we only have kind of like I mentioned, there's 6 to 8 or so that are here during the nesting season. Here's our timeline for piping plovers. Again, here's that big March kind of push where we get big numbers. There's another big push here in the fall. And then we kind of have a steady number throughout the winter. And there's this little gap here in June where we don't see piping plovers at all, but we will see them through May, and then they'll actually start to show back up again in July after their nesting season. And then again, red dots. They don't nest here, so we don't normally see them in the summer months. We got a ton of them here during spring, and we've got some here in the fall as well. All right, so I'll quickly kind of just go through a couple of the other more common species that we'll see out on Kiawah. Here's one of the royal terns I mentioned in contrast to the least tern. They've got the orange bill with a black cap. They're also much larger than the least tern. We have the semi-palmated plover as well. So color-wise, they look similar to the Wilson's plover, but they're not as light as the piping plover, but they have similar color legs and orange and bill as the piping plover. They just don't have that white back. Sanderlings are another really common species on the island. These are the birds that you're going to see kind of running in and out. They're going to be with the waves. So if you're out on the beach and you kind of see little birds that run out with the waves go out, and then they run back in as the wave pushes them back in, those are most likely going to be sanderlings. Dunlin is another super common bird that you'll see sometimes on the front beach, but more often you'll see them out at the ends of the island. We can have huge flocks of Dunlin in the winter. We've had some flocks estimated over 10,000. Birds here in the wintertime. On the front beach, you'll also see them kind of anywhere along the beachfront, and these guys actually nest on the island as well. They will nest on the beaches, but they tend to nest kind of more closer to the dunes or by the marsh rather than kind of closer to the beach side. And then I do have a picture of black skimmer here. I did mention that the oyster catcher kind of has a similar look to a skimmer, but they are obviously much different. And then I'm not going to go through all these, but I just made a list of all the other shorebird and seabird birds that you'd likely be able to see on our beaches. There's a lot of them out there. All right, I am done with my portion. So I will turn it over to Cindy, and she will share her screen and talk a little bit about the Shorebird Stewardship Program. And then once she is done, we will see if we can answer any of the questions or go from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Can everybody hear me? I have some microphone thing. So I know that may have been a lot of information for a lot of the new people. Don't be overwhelmed. We are not expecting you to be an expert at all. I am Cindy McKinley. Shelley Arthur and I are part of the leadership team under Betty Papillo, who is the Shorebird Steward Coordinator. And I am going to share my screen. Hopefully you are all seeing the Shorebird Stewardship screen right there. As Aaron has shown, shorebirds need our help. My numbers are a little different than his because all the studies show different things, but this statistic shows that shorebirds have declined over 70% in the past 40 years. And that is why we have a Shorebird Stewardship Program. Studies have shown that beaches with these programs are making a difference. And the populations of several coastal bird species have grown considerably faster in areas with active shorebird stewardship programs. Now, if you're anything like me, you might not know much about the shorebirds and wonder if you can do this. I still call every little bird a sanderling, and I know they're not, but that's the way I am so far because I am not an expert birder. You don't need to be overwhelmed. You don't need to be stressed out about identifying everything right away. I promise this will be the most relaxed and fun volunteering that you'll ever do. Just focus on learning the handful of birds that Aaron talked about today. In fact, if you just want to do the flock watch red knot season, you only need to identify one bird. So hopefully, I think even my husband got that one figured out. Then maybe you'll decide to add on the nesting birds to your stewarding, and you'll slowly learn more about a few birds as you go along. But the important thing is to have a desire to help the birds. And we're going to help you with your training. So don't be afraid to tell beachgoers that you're a brand new steward and you're still learning as you go. They're usually very understanding. The Shorebird Stewardship Program is broken into 3 different seasons that overlap slightly. We have red knot season, which we also call flock watch, nesting season, and the fall winter migration season. You don't need to feel pressured to sign up for more than one season. If you just want to do one season, red knot flock watch is really a lot of fun, but some people just like to do the nesting season or the winter migration season. Now, in the past 40 years, red knots have declined by as much as 85%. And as Erin mentioned, about 41% of the world's roofer red knots come to Kiawah, which is why our program is so very important. By April, we're going to have thousands of them on our beach. And by the time they're ready to fly to the Arctic in May, they will have needed to double their weight. Our goal is to let people know that it's important for the birds to be able to rest and conserve their energy in order to complete their migration and to successfully breed. One spooked bird can cause the entire flock to rise up and fly away, and that is energy spent on flying and time wasted that could be used eating. Children, bikers, and dogs who get too close or chase them interrupt the birds. And as Erin mentioned, dogs look like coyotes to birds. Even from a long distance, a dog will spook them. And that's why it's very important that dogs stay out of the critical area and also stay further away from the birds than people might get. It helps to remind beachgoers, we aren't anti-dog. Many of us have dogs. We love dogs. We're just here to teach people how to coexist with the birds on the beach. This slide shows a couple of things you can say to beachgoers when you approach them. This is going to be in the little manual that we send out to you, but it just kind of gives you some ideas of how to approach people. One strategy is to stand away from the edge of the flock and watch the people heading towards you. Point out the birds to the beachgoers and ask them to walk around the flock to avoid making them fly. Use the laminated materials that we'll give you to tell them a little about the birds and be positive. Approach them in a positive manner. Most people are here instead of Myrtle Beach because they like Kiawah's pristine nature. And when you share with them about the birds, the visitors are usually very excited and they often feel like you've added a special bonus to their vacation. Sometimes I'll pick out a family playing in the surf and bring the parents a few cool shells to give to their kids or to offer someone, maybe take their photo for them. And then I'll say, hey, do you know about these special birds on our beaches? Even if there aren't any red knots nearby, I can show them photos on the laminated materials and tell them to keep a lookout for them on the rest of their trip. Now, not coincidentally, the dog restriction areas mimic the critical areas for both the red knots and the nesting birds, as Erin mentioned. Red knots roost in large flocks on the ends of the island, usually at Captain Sam Spit down here on the west end. From approximately 1 hour before until 1 hour after high tide, which if you ever go watch the dolphin strand feed is sort of the opposite time period. So you have 2 reasons to go down to Captain Sam Spit now. As the tide goes out, the birds are going to spread out along the front beach looking for the little coquina clams that are exposed by the receding tide. So that's this green area. Flock watch stewards can go down to Captain Sam Spit near high tide, and they can tell the beachgoers about the birds and remind them that dogs are not allowed there. There is a sign right around where this red line starts here, beyond Beachwalker Park, but it's right up near the dunes, and a lot of times people don't notice that there is a sign there that says no dogs beyond this point. During the mid to low tide, the stewards can often walk up and down the beach in search of the birds. Nesting season overlaps with red knot season. You can choose to do both of them in April and May, or maybe just one at a time. Once the red knots leave, a lot of times people will move on to becoming nesting stewards. But remember, you can always choose to just be a nesting steward or just a flock watch steward. Now, last year, all of the nesting birds were exclusively at the east end of the island beyond the ocean course. And Aaron is saying that maybe there will be some at the west end. So my little picture here may not be perfect, but last year they were all down here on the east end. Stewards that go to the east end often will take a chair and some water and set themselves up just beyond the ocean course. Other stewards like to walk up and down the beach near the critical nesting areas to tell people about the birds and their precarious nests. These birds need plenty of space to safely nest and raise their young. And again, even from a long distance, a dog will spook these birds. And a nesting bird might leave his nest and the eggs can cook in a matter of minutes in the summertime. So it's really important that the dogs stay out of those critical areas. And we also offer a fall and winter stewarding, but I'm not going to really go into that right now. If you're interested in this, we will email some info in August or September with the details. It is a fun way to just point out the birds to people and share a bit about them. And it's really casual, it's really easy. We're going to provide you with laminated materials to help you share with the beachgoers. They're really helpful because those of us who aren't proficient birders can use this info to share with the birds. I always had like my favorite 2 pages that I showed regularly to people. You'll also get an ID tag to identify yourself as a Kiawah Island volunteer. It won't have your name on it, but will say that you're a volunteer, so try to wear that. And you'll earn this year's t-shirt after you've stewarded for 6 hours. And we also have vests for those who want one. During Flock Watch, we're actually going to be reusing the Flock Watch t-shirts that we had from last year. Take your cell phone with you. That's a really great way to take photos if you need to call Beach Patrol to submit your stewarding hours. And Betty loves to hear from you guys. So sending her pictures and texts and telling her about what you experienced on the beach kind of makes her day. Binoculars are also great. You can see the birds up close. You can share them with the beachgoers so they can see them really well. Returning stewards, you should use your materials from last year, but we do have some smaller little ring clips to hold your packets together. Those big rings we had last year, I think were kind of awkward. So if you want some of those, let us know. Now, our job is to pleasantly educate the public. Beachgoers don't want to hear a whole lot of information, so just let them know about the struggles of the birds and what people can do to help them. Enthusiasm is contagious, so share whatever you can to help them feel compassion for the struggles of these birds. And encourage word of mouth, because we can only reach a handful of people, but those people can reach even more. So ask them to spread the word. As I said, all interactions should be positive. It is not our job to enforce the rules on the beach. Most people just aren't aware of the rules. So if you come upon someone who's chasing the birds or walking through the dunes or letting their dogs off leash or in the forbidden areas, just let them know the rules, but in a kind way. In the very rare event that someone gives you pushback, it is not your job to enforce the rules. Just walk away. Do not engage with any negative comments. I like to tell people that I'm trying to help them avoid ruining their vacation by getting a ticket. Sometimes just letting them know that other beachgoers take photos and call Beach Patrol on them is enough. But feel free to call Beach Patrol if you want to report a violation. Just don't tell the person you are doing so, and don't ever engage in negative conversations. We want our program to be a positive experience for the beachgoers, so let Beach Patrol and Aaron be the bad guys. I don't mean to scare the newbies. This has never happened to me. It has never happened to many of us. People often respond to your tone of voice as well as your words. So if you remain non-confrontational and excited about the birds, it will help diffuse any negative response that you might come across. So unlike Turtle Patrol, we don't have stewarding shifts that you have to sign up for. And this is because the birds and the beachgoers are on the beach at all hours of the day. So any time that we can have stewards out there, it's great. The more people we reach, the better. If you are planning to walk on the beach anyway, take your stewarding gear with you and talk with some beachgoers. We also have a Red Knot Flock Alert text group. when there's a large flock near a bunch of beachgoers, it's helpful to have stewards on each side of the flock to gently ask people to keep their distance. A steward who needs help protecting a large flock from bikers and beachgoers can text Betty the location of the flock, which is usually the closest boardwalk. And then she'll send out a text to interested stewards letting them know about it. And if you're available and nearby, just head to the flock location and stand nearby to alert beachgoers of the flock. Don't feel bad if you can't come or if the birds fly off before you get there. But if you're able to go, it's awesome. If you want to be added to this texting group, just let Betty know. Once you signed up, we will send you an email with a link to the recording of this Zoom meeting and a training manual that has all the important info you'll need, including how to pick up your other materials and how to submit your volunteer hours. And this is a note for the returning stewards. We're going to have a new way to submit your hours online, so to be sure to read those instructions when you get them. Betty also periodically sends out training and fun bird posts. And we will try to set up walks with more experienced birders to help you improve your birding. We do have one upcoming training walk for anyone who wants to join us. Shelley, Arthur, and I will meet any new stewards or returning stewards who want a refresher near the showers at Beachwalker Park on March 6th at 10 a.m. When you get to the gate, just let them know you're here for Shorebird Steward training and you won't have to pay the entrance fee. Now, this contact info will be in the PDF manual, but if you want to take a screenshot of it, this is a great time to do it. If you are interested in stewarding, please contact Betty Papillo and she will add your name to her volunteer list. But even if you decide not to sign up with our program, you can be an informal steward just by sharing with your friends, neighbors, and other beachgoers what you've learned today. Thank you very much. And I am going to stop sharing. And Aaron, if you want to ask for questions or whatever, he can probably answer them better than I can, but I'm here if you have one for me.
Sure. Let me scroll through the comments real quick and see. I don't see any. So I guess if anybody has anything, feel free to either type it in the chat, or I guess just say yeah.
Aaron, I'll ask you a question about it's Pam. So I'll ask you a question about what's going on with the rules with the dogs. You said they're going to change up those rules. When are they going to do it? And what are the restrictions going to be?
We don't know yet. I am chairing that subcommittee and we haven't met yet. So I have some ideas of what I would like, but we have to go through the proper channels and get the right feedback and do all that first. So yeah, it'll probably be a little while because it'll also require an ordinance change, and any change to an ordinance has to go to town council, and it has to have 2 readings, which is at least 2 months of town council meetings. So likely any change that would occur probably will not officially occur, in the next 3 months.
Okay. So it won't be before the nesting season.
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not. I'm hoping to have that first meeting here in the next week or so. And I don't foresee like needing a bunch of meetings to discuss it. I'm hoping we can have one meeting among the subcommittee, and then make our recommendation to the environmental committee, which recommendation to council.